Our topic tonight is Malaysia-United States relations. That is interesting simply because not everybody sees our foreign policy with the same enthusiasm that some of our policymakers in Washington see it. And we're always interested in observations about it. And of course, Malaysia is one of the famous and continuing Asian tigers whose economies have impressed the world so greatly, and who many think are temporarily on some hard times financially, but people still project and think that the 21st century will be one in which the Asian countries will be vigorous and prominent in the global economy and in global politics. So at this particular juncture, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by the ambassador. And of course, along with other nations in the world, Malaysia has a somewhat different view of doing business with Iraq. And that too is a fascinating part of our world affairs at this time. Now, the ambassador's had a long and illustrious career. In looking at his resume, I envy it. Before becoming an ambassador, although he was in the Foreign Service starting in 1963, he was stationed in Paris, Ottawa, Bonn, Beijing, Tokyo, and Bangkok. And then after becoming an ambassador, was an ambassador to Pakistan, the Soviet Union, Sweden, and Belgium before the United States. And anyone who has any inclination to travel, of course, would love to have followed that path. But it covers fascinating years in the development of Malaysia, from its independence, really, the early days of its independence, through the time of great economic expansion and enormous change within the country, giving it a base for, we hope, great prosperity and happiness in the future. The ambassador, of course, also served 5 tours in the foreign ministry in Kuala Lumpur, and was there, held several offices, including Undersecretary and Deputy Secretary General. So he's had a long and very important career. We're delighted that he's joining us at this important moment. It's my great pleasure then to introduce and present to you His Excellency Dato Dali M. Hashim.
Thank you, Mr. Burd, for your kind introduction. Mr. Burd, President of the Baltimore Council on Foreign Relations or Foreign Affairs, ladies and gentlemen, I am indeed pleased to be here this evening and to have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you on some aspects of Malaysia-US relations, and how, more importantly, we can move forward this relationship for the mutual benefit of our two countries. I welcome this opportunity for this dialogue, and I believe that such dialogue session can only enhance our mutual understanding of one another, of our mutual appreciation of one another, of what we can offer to one another, and this will be the basis of how we can move forward in our relationship. As a start, I would like to mention briefly about the evolving situation in Malaysia. As you are all aware, we have been in the news lately. Unfortunately, it is not for a positive aspect of the news. I refer, of course, to the financial crisis, the crisis in the financial market that has afflicted Malaysia and other countries in that region, particularly Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines, and now spreading to Korea. I will, of course, limit my remarks to what is happening in Malaysia, how we see this, and how this impacts on our relationship with the United States. The Malaysian currency, the ringgit, came under heavy speculative pressures following the depreciation of the Thai baht in July this year. And this has resulted as of today in a 40% depreciation of the Malaysian currency, the ringgit, vis-a-vis the US dollar. Now this sharp fall in the value of the Malaysian currency has also affected the performance of the Malaysian stock market, which have witnessed very rapid and sharp decline. As of today, the loss of the stock market in value terms is more than 60%. So all in all, you can see that it is a very extraordinary situation that we are facing. We had then, to remedy the situation, taken a number of measures, and I'd like to repeat that it was a very extraordinary situation which had impact very negatively on our economic growth. In fact, in terms of the US dollar, our per capita income is now reduced to 3,000 US dollars from 5,000 US dollars. So this means that we have taken 10 years back. We were at that situation 10 years ago. So to deal with this evolving situation, the Malaysian authorities had taken a number of measures. I shall not go into detail the various measures that have been taken, but the net effect, net effect of all the measures taken has been the perception in the minds of a number of countries that there is a diminution of Malaysia's commitment to an open market and a deregulated economy. Malaysia's attitudes towards foreign participation in our economy is also being questioned. Now, in this regard, I would like to stress very strongly that both the Prime Minister as well as the Deputy Prime Minister have repeatedly stated and reiterated that Malaysia remains firmly committed to the open market and to the free enterprise system, and that we will continue to welcome foreign participation in our economic growth. Indeed, we are only too mindful of the significant contribution of foreign capital and technology to our industrialization, which has allowed us to progress from the humble beginning of labor-intensive semiconductor assembly of the 70s to today's highly sophisticated, high value-added manufacturing. And I would like to add that the US, as the top 3 biggest foreign investor in Malaysia, has contributed significantly to our industrialization process. And the Prime Minister himself, on numerous occasions, had publicly expressed Malaysia's appreciation to the US corporations in Malaysia for transferring technology to Malaysians. Now, ladies and gentlemen, clearly our past strategy for economic growth based on the free enterprise system and with foreign participation has brought us widespread prosperity. It would seem, therefore, that it is totally inconceivable that we would want to depart from this proven and highly successful path. What of the future? Well, are we going to how long will it take to get out of the woods? I can only say that we have always faced past challenges with an open mind and with a great deal of pragmatism. We are not blinkered by ideologies or dogmas. And we are deeply mindful of the need to learn from others and to work in cooperation with others. So it is in this spirit that Malaysia has been actively seeking greater international cooperation and participation to have a more orderly regime for currency trading. I would like to stress that Malaysia is not trying to impede currency trading. On the contrary, our initiatives have a twofold objectives. First is to facilitate the liberalization of financial markets, and secondly, to devise an internationally accepted framework or mechanism to enable countries to cope more effectively with market accesses associated with destabilizing capital flows. At the same time, we recognize that we have to remedy and correct whatever weaknesses in our economy. To this end, we will continue to take a number of measures to further strengthen our fundamentals, including shelving of a number of mega projects, improvements in our balance of payments, further tightening of our banking and financial system, and improved productivity. Now, I am confident that given the support of our foreign friends, including those from the United States, there should be no reason why Malaysia cannot continue on the path of strong economic growth. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make one or two what I feel are some significant outgrowth of this currency and financial crisis faced by Malaysia as well as by other countries in the region. And that is the active participation of China. You may recall that in the package to rescue the Thai baht, China had come up with a contribution of $1 billion. Now this, to us, augurs well because it shows that China is also keenly sensitive to the need to have countries around the region to be in a stable position, to have strong economic growth. In other words, this represents the entry of China into the mainstream of international economic life. And this would augur very well for the broader questions of peace and security and stability in the East Asian region. The other encouraging offshoot of the crisis faced by us is the greater solidarity and cohesion shown by the member countries of ASEAN, that is to say Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and the countries around that region, of helping each other. In the case of the Indonesian package, Singapore had come out with a contribution of $10 billion. Malaysia had contributed $1 billion, and also likewise, in the case of the rescue package for Thailand, Malaysia had made an offer of another $1 billion. So this goes to show that the great solidarity and cohesion within the region, within the countries of the region. And I like to stress that the efforts of the region should be viewed in conjunction with international efforts to try to improve the situation. So it is not a question of the region withdrawing and looking inwards, but it should be looked at as part and parcel of the overall international efforts to try to remedy the situation before it spreads to other places, and including having negative impact on the entire international economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to share some thoughts with you on some of the more significant aspects of US-Malaysia relations. Now let me stress at the outset that Malaysia attaches great importance and value this relationship. And it is indeed our strong desire to further to enhance this relationship for mutual benefit. I believe the US is also of the same mind, and it is therefore not surprising that our two nations have succeeded in establishing very considerable and significant bilateral links with trade and investment as the foundation of this relationship. Now, in terms of total trade, Malaysia was the US 11th largest trading partner in 1996. This is a graduation from the 12th place in 1995. From the perspective of the U.S. export market, Malaysia ranks number 17. This is indeed, I think, a remarkable fact, given that Malaysia's population of only 20 million, and yet able to provide an export market for the U.S. that is equivalent to the U.S. markets of India, Russia, and Indonesia combined, with a population of something like 1.4 billion. Now, this is, of course, indicative of the relatively open and liberal trade policies practiced by Malaysia, as well as a reflection of the overall and widespread prosperity of the country. Total U.S. exports to Malaysia in 1996 amounted to $8.8 billion. Now, the only country that exports more to Malaysia is Japan. I may add here that the figure of $8.8 billion that is exported from the U.S. to Malaysia would be much higher if we take into account exports to Malaysia from third countries, especially through Singapore. And of course, from Malaysia's perspective, the U.S. is Malaysia's biggest export market. Now, the above facts and statistics only serve to underscore the importance of trade in Malaysia-U.S. bilateral relations. Now, clearly, ladies and gentlemen, the present crisis in our financial markets is bound to affect the volume of trade between our two countries. Already, as I've mentioned to you, one of the measures taken by us to try to improve the economic fundamentals of the country is to shelve the implementation of a number of big projects valued to about 65 billion ringgit. Today's exchange rate, that would be about 17 billion as of now. But we are confident that we will be able to get out of the woods and continue to become an important and significant market for the U.S. Now, the other important dimension of Malaysia-U.S. relations is in the field of direct foreign investment. The U.S. is indeed an important source of direct investment, ranking over the years as either the first, second, or third biggest investor in Malaysia. We are indeed appreciative of American investment in Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier. And we find that American corporations in Malaysia have been foremost in transferring technology to Malaysians. At this juncture, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to briefly outline the historical perspective of Malaysia's economic transformation in order to get a better picture of what are the opportunities that lies ahead in terms of our bilateral relations. Now, Malaysia's economic transformation can be divided into three phases or stages of growth. The first stage is from 1957 to 1959, which was basically commodities-led. And for a long time, Malaysia was the biggest producer and exporter of latex rubber, of palm oil, tropical timber, and tin. The second stage of our growth was from 1970 to about 1990, when industrialization began and manufactured goods began to outstrip commodities as Malaysia's more significant exports. We are now in the third stage of our growth, which is from 1990 onwards. Now, this is the era which we call our Vision 2020, when we adopted bold and long-term measures to transform Malaysia into a fully developed country by the year 2020. This stage of growth will continue to be manufacturing-led. However, greater emphasis will be accorded to the services sector, value-added manufacturing, and high-technology industries targeted at the world market. Now, today, manufacturing goods contribute to about 78% of our exports, but we do not consider ourselves a truly industrialized country. To be a truly industrialized country, according to our Vision 2020, we cannot continue, in other words, with conventional manufacturing industries. We have to move into the information industry. Accordingly, in August of 1995, the Prime Minister of Malaysia announced the launching of Malaysia's Multimedia Super Corridor, or MSC for short. Now, what exactly is the MSC? Now, the MSC is both a physical area and a new paradigm for creating value in the information age. Physically, it is an area of beginning from Kuala Lumpur, stretching south for about 30 miles and with about 9 miles wide. And in this corridor, or in this area, we plan to place all the necessary technological and other infrastructures, as well as various legislations and policies designed to create the perfect environment for multimedia corporations, both domestic and international, to be located in this corridor to distribute, create, and employ multimedia products and services to their worldwide clients. I must also add that the MSC includes 2 other mega projects in its center. These are Putrajaya, the new administrative capital, and Cyber City, consisting of smart buildings with the latest state-of-the-art information infrastructure to meet both the living and business needs of the knowledge worker. Cyber City, or also known as IT City, will support a working population of approximately 150,000 and a living population of over 100,000, while Putrajaya, the new administrative capital, will have a living population of over 250,000 people. Now, it is obvious, ladies and gentlemen, that the physical aspect or dimension of the MSC itself already offers opportunities for participation by American corporations. Indeed, Malaysian officials responsible for the development of Putrajaya were in the States in January this year to examine a wide range of American-made technology with a value of more than $800 million for possible use in the construction of the new administrative capital, Putrajaya. In the meanwhile, we hope to kickstart the MSC project by targeting 7 multimedia industries for development by the year 2000. Now, given the crisis in our financial market, obviously the target date has to be advanced a little, and we are now thinking in terms of the year 2003 or maybe even 2005 for the implementation of these 7 flagship applications. These 7 flagship applications or projects will initially be developed by government in partnership with business, and opportunities exist for both local and international companies to shape the applications by taking up key development and implementation contracts. Now, the 7 projects are, I shall not go into the detail, I'll just give the title of the 7 projects: electronic government, 2 smart schools, 3 telemedicine, 4 R&D clusters, 5 national multi-purpose card, 6 borderless marketing centers, and 7 worldwide manufacturing web. Each of these flagship applications, we hope, will over the years generate a web of international and Malaysian companies collaborating to deliver innovative products and services to Asia and the world. These companies will take root and grow in an environment, as I have said earlier, that provides the required infrastructure, laws, and policies. To ensure the success and to make the MSC project more attractive, the government has offered a various range of incentives and benefits to the foreign investor who will invest in the corridor. I shall not go into detail of the various incentives and benefits that are being offered. All I want to say is that we are aware that our aims for the MSC may sound very ambitious, especially for a small and still developing country. But we are proud to say that we have a track record of achieving what we have set out to do. We do not underestimate the complexities and challenges of our venture. I have mentioned earlier that we are always mindful of the need to learn from others. Indeed, it is with such thoughts in mind that the Prime Minister had established an international advisory panel to advise him on the development and promotion of the MSC. Now, it is interesting that this advisory panel, which has 29 members, of these 29 members, 18 of them are American corporate figures. Now, this is a reflection of Malaysia's recognition of the leading position of America in information technology and of the important role of the US in our move towards the information age. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to say that the American investors will find in Malaysia a progressive and business-friendly government with a deep commitment to improve the well-being of its workers and peoples. We believe that business should be mutually beneficial to the parties concerned, while at the same time it should contribute to the good of the peoples and nation, whether they are involved or not involved. In short, business should enrich our world and help to relieve poverty and suffering everywhere, even as profits are made and enjoyed. It is therefore my fervent hope that the American entrepreneur would seize the opportunities provided to further enhance the bilateral economic links for mutual benefit and at the same time bring about further improvements in the quality of life of our two peoples. This in turn will contribute to the promotion of global peace and progress. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, we thank you for what I think was an unusually interesting description of circumstances in Malaysia, and thank you for reminding all of us the importance of priorities in your final remarks. The floor is now open for questions. Would you please elaborate on the list of exports from Malaysia to the United States, the things that we would recognize in our markets?
Yeah. Well, I must say that the bulk of our exports to the United States are actually produced of American corporations in Malaysia. In fact, 80% of our exports to the United States consists of electronic components. These are intermediate goods. And this is why I say that our relations with the US is indeed mutually beneficial, because these products are produced in Malaysia and they are exported back to the United States, which in turn are used as finished products with a high value added. This means that it creates jobs for Americans here in America. It earns them billions of dollars in export earnings. And for us in Malaysia, it provides us employment. It provides us the technology that this is essential for us at this present stage of our development. So more than 80% of our exports to the United States consists of electronic components.
Two questions, I think. Would you comment upon the dynamics of currency speculation? And then also comment on the current crisis and weigh the relative effect of currency speculation versus inherent weaknesses of various kinds of the economy.
Thank you. Yes, as I have mentioned earlier, that the Malaysian currency had come under heavy speculative attack following the devaluation of the Thai baht. And this has resulted, as I mentioned, in a 40% depreciation of the Malaysian currency. There was no doubt that there was very heavy speculative pressures on the Malaysian ringgit. And we believe, it is our perception, that this has precipitated a very sharp decline in the value of the Malaysian currency. We are not, unfortunately, it has been stated in the press that this is also due to some agenda by certain people. Now, this has been a misinterpretation, and the Prime Minister have repeatedly clarified that he has made no such allegation, that he does not talk in terms of a conspiracy, he does not talk in terms of agenda by anyone or any party. But it is without doubt that currency speculation have brought about this very sharp decline of our currency, with the attendant effect on the stock market and the economy as a whole. It is for this reason why Malaysia have recently been giving a lot of attention and spending a lot of efforts in trying to get some form of regulation. I know the word regulation immediately causes people to sit back and to be very cautious. But we feel that currency trading is like any trade. And if you look at international trade in merchandise, it is a dynamic process. It is not static. I mean, international trade, the practice of international trade has been, there has been changes, there has been improvement, there have been ramifications in the practices of international trade. And when you bear in mind that currency trading is about 95% of the trade that's going on, and that trade in merchandise is only 5%, we feel that it is therefore important to have some regulation on currency trading without impeding currency trading. I know this is a fine balance, a fine line to be drawn. And also we feel very strongly that there is a need to have some form of internationally accepted mechanism or formula to help countries to better cope with excessive manipulation and speculation of currency, which has a very, very destabilizing effect on the economies of the countries affected. Now, having said that, we are certainly not suggesting that this is the only problem and that if we cure currency trading, if we have some sort of a regime to manage currency trading, everything will be rosy. No, we are certainly not suggesting that for a moment. And that's why I said that countries have had to take a very serious look at themselves to try to correct whatever weaknesses. And certainly, in the case of Malaysia, there are a number of measures that we have taken to try to correct the weaknesses and to try to improve our economic fundamentals. I have mentioned, for example, the postponement or the shelving of the implementation of 6 projects, including the controversial hydro dam project in Sarawak, the Bakun project, valued to about $65 billion. And at the same time, we have also tightened up the financial the financial situation for banks to operate. For example, we have limit now the expansion of credit, which is also a very, we are very aware that there's a big overhang of borrowings by the banks in Malaysia. So this is another area that has been dealt with in a very serious manner. So what we're trying to say is that even if we were to do all these things, improve the fundamentals and all that sort of thing, but if currency trading is allowed to go unchecked, then no matter how strong the fundamentals, if the country can be affected if there is a sustained manipulation or attack on that currency. In the case of Malaysia, 4 months ago, we were considered, together with, I suppose, Thailand, Philippines, and others, we were considered the darlings of the investment world. And yet, 5 months later, everything we do seems to be wrong. But the fundamentals are still the same. Nothing has changed. So we were wondering, how is that, in the case of Malaysia, for example, when we have managed to bring down our current deficit from 10.2%. When it was at 10.2%, money was pouring in. The ringgit was stabilized, was very strong. And when we brought it down to 5.2 and hopefully to 4% and the target by 3% in the year 2000, we find that our ringgit has lost 40%. So something is not quite right here.
The question was, will you comment upon your relations with Singapore, and can Singapore continue, part of the same question perhaps, indefinitely as an independent city-state?
Certainly. I see no reason why Singapore should not continue as an independent sovereign state. They are very hard industrialized people. They have got very high technology. And there is no reason to doubt that Singapore will not continue as a prosperous city-state. As you know, that Singapore was once part of Malaysia, and this is one of the things that I think we are very proud when, especially when we look around the world, that what has happened in Bosnia. But in the case of Singapore, there was recognition on both sides that we could not continue as one country. So we separated very peacefully. There was not one harsh word being said. And we find that a prosperous Singapore is good for us. And we have always advocated that we would like to see all our neighbors and indeed the entire world as prosperous, because this will be good for us.
Would you comment on any differences, if there are some, between the United States and Malaysia within the United Nations?
Well, it is natural that there are certain issues that we do not see eye to eye, or there's no convergence of view between Malaysia and the United States. I think this is only natural, given the different perspective, given the different criteria, given the different interests and imperatives that exist between Malaysia and the United States. So one area that there is no agreement, or rather there is a divergence of views between Malaysia and the United States, is the most recent one I can think, of course, is a question of the banning of landmines. The others are not, and on certain environmental matters, this is not to say that we do not attach importance to the question of the environment. In fact, I just saw in our papers today, in our local newspapers today, a report to say that one company director has been sentenced to 6 months imprisonment, and his crime was that he had opened fire. He had burned some some what do you call that? Some rubbish, not in an environmentally friendly manner. This is just to show the extent of the importance we attach to try to protect our environment. But obviously, the approach is different. And then the other areas where there has been some differences it's more of a perception and the route to achieving that objective rather than the objective or the philosophy of it. For example, on human rights again, this is another area where we have some disagreement. Not that we do not pay attention to human rights, but we believe that the human rights criteria, the yardstick used by America, is for America. But that same criteria or the same yardstick may not be applicable to Malaysia because of certain conditions, certain situations, differing backgrounds and culture and religion and what have you. But by and large, I must say that the US is indeed a good friend of Malaysia, and that this relationship is very, very substantive, and as I said earlier, a mutually beneficial one. And you'll be surprised to learn that in Malaysia right now, there are more than 100,000 young men and women who have graduated from American universities. And at one time, we had about 28,000 Malaysian students here studying in the United States. And right now, the United States is still the favorite destination of our Malaysian students pursuing their degrees overseas. In fact, 6 out of every 10 Malaysians who goes overseas for their university education comes to the United States. So what we have is actually a group of young people who will be the future leaders in industry, in government, with a very strong and I believe very memorable impression of the United States. And this is something that we are now trying to create. The government of Malaysia is trying to now create centers of learning, centers of excellence in Malaysia itself, so that, excuse me, we hope that what was previously a one-way traffic of young men and women coming to study in the United States and getting to know the United States, getting to love the United States, there will also be that flow of people and ideas from the United States to Malaysia. And that would be very good for all.
Speaking for investors in the Pacific Rim, the question is, what happened?
I really wish I knew. Yeah. As I was saying earlier, that 5 months ago we were in a very rosy and happy situation, and suddenly we find that this is happening to us. I guess what happened was that there was another look taken by foreign investors at countries in the region, and maybe what they saw, which was acceptable to them in the past, is now no longer acceptable. And there is proof that some money was taken out from Thailand first, and then there was this contagion to the other countries in Southeast Asia. That's the only explanation that I can think of. I really do not know what is the reason for this very dramatic change of in the situation facing us in Southeast Asia. As I mentioned earlier, the fundamentals were the same. And in fact, in the case of Thailand, as recent as late last year, I think it was 4th, is it 4th? General Motors of Ford was thinking of investing 850 million for another automotive plant in Thailand. And that was as recent as late last year. And suddenly now, it no longer appears to be a perspective. The whole countries of Southeast Asia is now regarded as a great risk area. But we are very confident that given the measures that we have taken and with the support of our foreign friends, that we will get out of the woods. The time frame given is anything from 2 to 3 years.
The question is it correct that prominent Malaysians have in fact been among currency speculators, and where does that fit within your view of the problem?
Oh yes, there has been report that there have been also some of the speculators were Malaysians businessmen. So we are not saying that only foreign speculators are to be blamed. No. What we are saying is that currency speculation, whether it is done by foreigners or by the locals, is not a healthy thing. Excessive manipulation and speculation is not healthy, whether it is by nationals or non-nationals of the country.
Is your view that the American economy might have some dangerous spots in it as well?
No. I think the American economy is certainly very strong, and that you have experienced 6 consecutive years of very healthy growth with low inflation, and that so far you have been able to keep in check the inflationary pressures. And with proper management, I don't see any reason why you cannot continue to have this strong growth and sustainable growth for a long, long time. In fact, our leaders in Malaysia have always said that it is wrong for us to think that of countries undergoing boom and bust. Then it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We should try to not to think that it is patterned, that countries are patterned to go boom and bust.
The question is, would you please elaborate on the distinctions you made between the nature of human rights in the United States and Malaysia, or the approach to human rights?
Well, let's take freedom of speech for one. Here in the United States, this is paramount, freedom of speech. But in Malaysia, it is not that we do not believe in the freedom of speech. Yes, there is freedom of speech, but it is also in our constitution, for example, that there are certain sensitive things that one must not talk about in public. This is because our country, being a young country, we got our independence in 1957. So that makes us 40 years old only. So we are evolving. And we must not forget that the United States is more than 200 years old, and it has evolved over a longer period. Certainly, we would like to become like the United States, where we can have total freedom of speech. But for the moment, we feel that because of the multiracial nature of our society, because of certain sensitive matters, we cannot have certain things debated in public. And we make no bones about it. Now, what are some of the things that we say that cannot be debated or cannot be questioned? We cannot, for example, incite hatred for other religions. We cannot question, for example, the government affirmative action to try to improve the economic and social conditions of the indigenous people. So these are all some temporary restrictions that we have put for the sake of maintaining peace and security in the country. Because if we do not have peace and security in the country, then our efforts to improve the economic and social conditions of our people, which in the final analysis, that is the final thing. We are talking about quality of life of the people. And if we do not have that initial period of peace and stability, it would be very difficult for us to implement some of our economic programs. And certainly, this is not an excuse for oppression. That is not acceptable. But what we are saying is that in the case of Malaysia, we find that there must be some limits now, insofar as freedom of speech is concerned, freedom of action. But in terms of basic human rights, of choosing a government of your choice, that is, of course, enshrined in our constitution. It does not mean that the government cannot be replaced by the choice of the people. So there are some areas that we are in agreement, that we share the same belief, we share the same ideals, but certain aspect of human rights is where we differ.
As a follow-up in a way to your observation, would you explain the racial and religious mix in Malaysia?
Yes. Well, the majority of the, first of all, in terms of religion, 55% of the population are Muslim. Then there are about 28% who are Chinese and they are Buddhists. Then there are about 8% Hindu and about 5% Christian, and then a variety of other tribal religions. In terms of the major races, there are the indigenous people who are known as Malays. Then there are about 28% Chinese who came from China, about 8% Indians, and again a mixture of various tribal people.
What other countries besides the United States do you import from?
Besides the United States?
Your imports are from what countries besides the
see.
United States?
The major imports, of course, is from Japan, which is our biggest importer, and then from the European communities. So between then Korea, Taiwan, and China. And of course now growing from the Southeast Asian countries.
I think I know what you wanted to comment on, but you correct me if I'm wrong. It's asserted that there's a correlation between success in the multimedia industries and liberal attitudes. Not traditional Boston and California, perhaps, but in any case, the theory is liberal communities, open communities, are connected with success in that area. And if indeed your view of freedom of speech is somewhat more restrictive, does that contradict your efforts to develop a multimedia area?
No, there's no contradiction at all in my mind. When I say that there is a restriction in the freedom of speech, this applies to Malaysian. But you know, in Malaysia, we can get any newspapers at all. They are not restricted. And certainly, we recognize that for the multimedia super corridor project to be successfully implemented, it requires an environment of freedom. And indeed, this is basic in our approach. And we, in fact, are not even contemplating on putting, I'm not too sure what is the technical term, but you know, to prevent certain undesirable material in the internet from reaching, pornography, for example, from reaching to the users of the internet. We are not even thinking of installing that technical aspect to control that. We hope through moral persuasion and increasing the moral awareness to act as the main bulwark to prevent the spread of undesirable material in the internet. So we recognize that. And of course, we would like to cooperate with countries to try to see whether or not we could come up with all the cyber laws that are required to enhance and promote cyber commerce. So we recognize that we cannot have restriction if we are to hope to successfully implement the MSC project.
Would you give us a brief political history of the last 40 years in Malaysia?
Yes. Well, first of all, our country is patterned along that of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, where we have parliamentary democracy, we have a number of political parties, and the political party that wins the majority number of seats in parliament is asked to form the government. And the leader of that political party becomes the chief executive or head of government of the country. And since our independence in 1957, there has been 9 open and free elections held. And the party that is in power has been winning all the 9 elections. But this does not mean that, as I stressed, it was open and free elections, because in the last election, for example, there was one state in which not even one seat was won by the ruling party. And that in the 13 states of Malaysia, we had at one time 2 states that was governed by a political party not belonging to the ruling party nationwide. So at the moment, there is only 1 state left which has a government from a party that comes from the opposition. And over the years, there has been always a good number of the members of the different party, of the non-government party, that have been elected in the parliament. And the parliamentary proceedings, I can assure you, is quite lively.
Mr. Ambassador, it's been a thoroughly informative evening and very enjoyable. We thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.